Part 1. The Watcher in the Trees. It was back in 2015. I had planned a solo road trip to this old forest area, just a few hours from where I lived. I wasn't really looking for anything fancy, just some adventure, a little bit of solitude, and maybe the kind of eerie quiet you only find deep in the woods. What really drew me in, though, was this old fire lookout tower, long abandoned and just sitting up there in the middle of nowhere. What I'd read online, it was technically illegal to go inside, or even be up there at all. The structure hadn't been maintained in years, so the risk of collapse was real. Still, a bunch of forum posts and blogs from hikers said it seemed okay, at least a few years back. The last update I could find was already 3 years old by the time I read it, so I honestly had no idea what kind of condition the place would be in. I found this narrow ditch off the side of a dirt road where I could park my car, and then I grabbed my backpack, stuffed with enough supplies for 2 days. The thing about trips like this is, there are no trails, not really. You're not following any kind of official route. So I relied on a handheld GPS, one of those satellite ones that works off the grid. Even then, it was mostly just me pushing my way through thick brush and steep hills, following the general direction on the screen. The hike took me close to 5 hours, and as I got deeper in, the terrain just got rougher. Trees packed tighter, undergrowth thicker, rocks more unpredictable. I was all in at that point, really hoping the lookout would still be standing and usable, or I'd have to sleep out in the open somewhere. Eventually, I spotted the top of the tower peeking out over the tree line. My legs were dead tired, but seeing it gave me this new energy. As I got closer, it actually didn't look bad at all. Sure, the paint was peeling off and the wood was sun-bleached, but it looked solid. I gave the support beams a few hard pushes, no wobble. The ladder was metal, a bit rusted, creaky, but felt sturdy enough, so I climbed up. When I got to the top, the view was something else. It was just forest, endless forest. No roads, no signs of civilization, just a blanket of trees in every direction. It was peaceful and humbling all at once. Inside the lookout, it was bare bones, a single room, maybe 150 square feet. In one corner, a moldy old mattress, in the other, a rotting desk. The windows, though, those were incredible. They stretched across every wall, giving you a full panoramic view. I set my stuff down, rolled out my sleeping bag, and made myself a quick hot meal on my tiny stove. Then I sat on the ledge and watched the sun dip below the trees. The sky turned from orange to dark blue to pitch black. No stars, no moonlight, just clouds and total darkness. I stayed on that ledge longer than I meant to, just soaking in the silence. But after about an hour, something caught my eye. A light. Faint, flickering, and moving slowly through the trees below. At first I thought maybe it was another camper, but this light didn't look like a flashlight. It had this orange hue to it, like a flame. It reminded me of a torch, which made zero sense. Who walks around deep in the forest with a torch in the middle of the night? I watched the light for a while, moving between the trees, slowly and steadily. Then it disappeared. Just gone behind a clump of trees and never came out the other side. I waited another 30 minutes, but it didn't return. I stayed seated, looking out over the forest, trying to brush off the weirdness. Then, just as I was about to go inside, I noticed something else. Down at the base of the lookout, standing in the small clearing between the structure and the forest, was a person. Just standing there, looking straight up at me. I called out, "Hello?" They didn't respond, didn't move. For maybe 10 or 15 seconds, it was just the two of us, separated by the height of the tower and that dark space between us. Then the figure slowly raised one hand, just kind of a lazy, open-palmed wave or maybe a gesture of acknowledgement, and turned around, walking silently back into the woods. No light, no flashlight, no torch. I should have felt terrified, and a part of me did. But at the same time, something in me was just convinced it was another hiker, maybe disappointed to find the lookout already occupied. Still, I couldn't shake the way he stood there, the way he moved. Something was odd. I sat out on the ledge for a bit longer, trying to shake the weird feeling, but eventually went inside and climbed into my sleeping bag. The wind had picked up and was whistling through the cracked window panes. The whole structure creaked and groaned with every gust. It wasn't exactly peaceful, but I eventually dozed off. I don't know how long I was asleep when I woke up. Could have been an hour, maybe 3. The wind had died down and the whole forest was silent. Then I heard it. The creaking of the metal ladder. That soft, unmistakable metallic groan. Just one step. Then another. Then another. Someone was climbing up. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. The sound of footsteps on the rungs, getting closer, faster, like someone was rushing up. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag and grabbed my backpack, trying to stay quiet as I stepped out onto the ledge. The creaking stopped. Total silence. I waited, then slowly crept around the edge of the tower to where the ladder was. Nobody. I stepped closer, leaned over the edge. The ladder was empty, nothing but darkness below. Then, behind me, footsteps, fast ones, running across the wooden walkway. I spun around just in time to catch a dark figure sprinting past the windows on the opposite side. I didn't hesitate. I hit the ladder hard, sliding and scrambling down as fast as I could, barely keeping my footing on the wet metal. Halfway down, I looked up and saw a face, a shadowed figure looking down from the ledge. I didn't stop until I hit the ground and bolted into the trees. And thank God I had my backpack. Inside was my flashlight, my GPS, my lifeline. I ran through the woods for hours, not stopping until I reached my car. I didn't see anyone behind me. I never looked back. Part 2. The Footprints by the Lake. You'd think after something like that, I'd be done with the woods for a while. But a few months later, maybe a little too soon in hindsight, I went back out. Different place this time. Just a quiet little lake I knew about from childhood. My dad used to bring me there. It's the kind of spot you'd never find on any map. No signs, no designated campsites, just a thin path through the trees only locals would even know existed. I wasn't looking for an adrenaline rush or some haunted tower. I just wanted to get away from everything, relax by the water, and spend a quiet weekend in nature. That first day was exactly that. Set up camp, cooked some food, walked around the lake a few times. Pure peace. The air was calm, birds were chirping, and it felt like the kind of place where nothing bad could ever happen. But on the second day, things started to shift. I'd been walking laps around the lake again, mostly just thinking, letting my mind drift. I must have circled the lake 3 or 4 times throughout the day, but on one of those laps, I saw something new, something that hadn't been there before. Footprints. Right along the tree line, at the edge of the clearing by the lake, I almost stepped on them. They were fresh, clearly defined in the dirt, not rained over or weathered. And here's what really messed with me. They were barefoot. Not boot prints, not sneakers, just bare feet, toes and all, clear as day. That freaked me out more than I'd like to admit. I mean, who walks around barefoot in the woods? And I hadn't seen or heard anyone else the entire time I'd been there. No splashing in the lake, no voices, nothing. What made it worse was the direction they went. The prints led out from the woods, stopped near the lake like someone had just stood there, watching, and then went straight back into the trees, like they came to observe, then vanished. I didn't follow them. Hell no. I just turned around and walked back to my tent. But the whole time, my eyes were darting between the trees. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me all along, maybe still was. Even as the sun began to set, I kept scanning the tree line, looking for movement, listening for twigs snapping or leaves rustling. But there was nothing, just the sound of wind on water and the occasional bird. When it got dark, I built up the fire nice and high. I kept adding wood, not because it was cold, but because the light gave me comfort. I sat there for a long time, staring into the flames, trying to talk myself down. "You're overthinking," I told myself. "It's just someone else out here, probably a local. Maybe they left in a hurry and didn't want to be seen." But even I didn't believe that. Then came the footsteps. From the trees. Slow, deliberate, more than one pair. My stomach dropped. I turned toward the sound, and within seconds, 2 figures stepped out of the woods, just far enough into the light of the fire for me to see their outlines. A man and a woman. They didn't say anything, didn't wave, didn't look scared or surprised. They just stopped at the edge of the light. I couldn't make out their faces, just the general shapes of their bodies. The woman was closest to me. I said, "Can I help you?" And without a word, she turned and bolted back into the darkness of the woods. Just like that, gone. The man stayed, still barefoot, still silent. I asked again, "Do you need something?" He didn't answer, just stood there for a few moments more, then slowly turned and walked back the same way the woman had gone. My heart was in my throat. That was it. That was all I could take. I packed my stuff fast, didn't even care how sloppy it was or how heavy my bag ended up. I just needed to leave, right then. I kicked the extra logs from the fire to scatter the flames and make sure nothing would spread once I was gone. Then I grabbed my gear and walked straight into the woods. It was a long walk back, close to 2 hours, and for the first 10 minutes, I was constantly checking over my shoulder, convinced I was being followed. But I didn't hear or see anything, not at first. Around 40 minutes in, the forest changed. It got too quiet. No birds, no insects, just dead silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel natural. And then I heard it. Running footsteps. Off to my right, distant but fast, like someone sprinting barefoot through the trees. I froze, turned my flashlight in that direction. Nothing. I started walking again, faster now, trying to stay calm. But just a few minutes later, the same sound came again, this time on the left. Closer. The way the footsteps started and stopped, always moving but never getting close enough to see, it was like I was being circled, watched, herded. I kept going. Every time I thought maybe I was in the clear, the footsteps came back, always just far enough away to keep me guessing. I have no idea how I stayed sane during that walk, but I made it. Eventually, my truck came into view, parked where I'd left it off the road. I didn't even bother catching my breath. I threw my bag in the passenger seat, slammed the door, and got the hell out of there. I never saw who or what was out there that night, and I don't think I want to. I never went back to that lake again. Part 3. Rain, thunder, and a knock on the van. A couple years later, I was living a completely different kind of life. I'd moved into a small camper van, traveling full-time along the West Coast. The freedom was everything I'd hoped for. Just me, the road, and a rotating cast of forests, mountains, and beaches. I'd stop in small towns for supplies, but most nights I'd camp in the backcountry. Quiet, off-the-grid spots were my favorite. In fact, I always felt safer in the deep woods than I ever did stealth camping in a Walmart parking lot or some crowded roadside lot. No people meant no problems, usually. This story takes place somewhere between 2 cities in Washington. I'd been moving slowly, taking back roads and stopping at little-known spots to camp out for a few nights. One day, I pulled off onto a dirt trail winding through the forest. There were a few pull-offs along the path, but they were all empty. It looked like no one had been down there in a long time, which was perfect. At the very end of the trail, the trees opened up just enough for a wide circular clearing. flat ground surrounded by dense forest with a stone fire ring already built in the center. It wasn't exactly scenic, no view of mountains or lakes, but it was secluded, peaceful, and quiet. I parked, leveled out the van, and started cooking dinner on my little propane stove. The side door was open, letting in the crisp spring air. It had been raining off and on all week, typical for Washington, so I was trying to enjoy the dry window while it lasted. Within half an hour, the sun had dipped below the horizon and the clouds were rolling in again. The drizzle started just as I shut the van door. I cracked open one of the small rear windows for airflow and settled onto my bed to watch a show on my laptop. I was about halfway through an episode when something strange happened. A sudden glare hit my screen. It was just a flash, a light reflecting off the laptop. But it wasn't coming from inside the van. It came through the open window behind me. Before I could turn around, the glare disappeared. It didn't fade, it turned off. Like someone had shut off a flashlight or flipped a switch. I whipped around to look outside, but all I saw were trees. The rain was coming down harder now, and it was already pitch black out there. That was the first red flag. Because behind that window, that was the forest. No roads, no trail, just thick trees and wet ground. There shouldn't have been any light coming from that direction. I told myself it was probably another camper, maybe someone who took a side path I hadn't noticed and turned their headlights off after parking. But it didn't make sense. The light had come from the trees, not the trail. Still, I didn't have much to go on. I turned back to my laptop and tried to focus, occasionally glancing at the windows. Between the rain hitting the metal roof and the rustling of leaves, it was hard to tell what was real and what my mind was inventing. Eventually, I gave up on the show and got ready for bed. I closed the window, shut all the curtains, and killed the lights. Inside the van, it was completely dark. I got under the covers and tried to fall asleep. But I couldn't. The rain got heavier. Thunder started rumbling in the distance. The whole van shook with every gust of wind. Hours passed. And then I heard it. A sharp, clear crack of something outside. Like someone had stepped on a branch. It was close. Too close. I froze. Held my breath. Listened. Nothing for a few seconds. Then, faintly, a voice. A man's voice. Low and hushed, like he was whispering to someone. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't move. Didn't even dare breathe too loud. If someone was out there and they didn't already know I was in the van, I wasn't about to clue them in. But they probably did know. I mean, it's a van. It's not exactly subtle. They likely saw the light earlier. They might have seen me through the cracked window. Still, I stayed completely still, heart pounding. Then came the sound that I'll never forget. A soft press against the side of the van, right at the sliding door. Plastic bending inward, like someone was leaning against it. Then a knock. Light. Deliberate. 3 seconds passed. Another knock. They were trying to be calm, trying not to scare me, but it was working anyway. And then the voice came again. "Sheriff's Department, open up, please." I didn't believe it for a second. If they were really cops, why wait so long to identify themselves? Why knock so quietly? They kept knocking, mixing in phrases like, "We need to ask you a few questions," and "Just want to make sure you're okay." I lifted the curtain just a crack and peeked out through the rain. All I saw was a silhouette. No flashlight, no badge, no reflective gear. Just a dark figure standing by the door. That was all I needed to see. I made a split-second decision. I climbed into the driver's seat, turned the key, and fired up the engine. As soon as I did, I heard them run. 2 sets of footsteps, one from each side of the van, sprinting toward the windows. I didn't look back. I threw it in gear and got out of there, the van bouncing and fishtailing on the muddy trail, but it held. I made it back to the main road and drove for over an hour before pulling over to catch my breath. The next day, I reported it to the county sheriff's office. They said no officers were out in that area that night. No patrols, no search teams. Just me, alone, in the woods.